Hello, everyone. My name is Olivia Brown, and yes, I'm the woman who famously superglued her cheating husband to his mistress. The story the media told you is true, but it's only a fraction of the truth. They talked about the 911 call and the headlines, but they don't know what happens when a woman like me, a woman who builds her life on logic and law, is pushed past her breaking point. They don't know that I didn't just take my revenge. I took everything. So, where are you watching from today? Grab a cup of coffee or something stronger, because you're going to need it. Do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because you won't want to miss a single word of how this nightmare began. Our house was a masterpiece of deceit. From the outside, it was a testament to the American dream, a sprawling colonial with pristine white siding, nestled in the manicured suburbs of Connecticut. It was the kind of house that whispered of old money and stable lives. Inside, it was a museum of a dead marriage, each room a carefully curated exhibit of a life I thought was real. Mark and I were the perfect couple, or so everyone believed. He was a charismatic financial advisor, the kind of man who could sell you on your own ruin and make you thank him for it. I was a partner at a downtown law firm, sharp, respected, and, as it turned out, breathtakingly naive. A marriage, I've learned, doesn't die in a single, explosive moment. It dies quietly, in 1,000 little paper cuts that you ignore until you're bleeding out on the polished hardwood floors. The first cut was the distance. It started subtly. Mark began working late, his excuses wrapped in the jargon of market volatility and demanding clients. Then came the scent, a faint, cloyingly sweet perfume that clung to his suits, a scent that was definitely not mine. When I asked, he'd laugh it off. Angela must have spilled something in the office again, he'd say, referencing his new, much younger, and apparently very clumsy secretary. He had an answer for everything. That was Mark's talent. His words were like smooth, polished stones, skipping over the messy surface of the truth. He was so convincing that for months, I convinced myself I was the one who was broken, that grief was making me paranoid. You see, a year before, we had lost our son, a stillbirth at 8 months that had hollowed me out, leaving a crater where my heart used to be. Mark had been my rock, or so I thought. In reality, he was just standing on the rubble of my grief to get a better view of his escape route. The paranoia festered, a low-grade fever in the back of my mind. So, I did what any good lawyer would do. I started gathering evidence. My grief had made me invisible, a ghost in my own home, and I used that to my advantage. I wasn't a hysterical wife. I was an investigator building a case against the man who shared my bed. The first camera was the hardest. It was a tiny thing, disguised as a smoke detector, which I placed in our master bedroom. My hands trembled as I synced it to a secure app on my phone, a sick feeling churning in my stomach. This was a line I could never uncross, but the suspicion was a poison, and this felt like the only antidote. I put another in the living room, hidden in a bookshelf, and a third in the kitchen. I became the warden of my own prison, watching the silent, empty feeds, waiting for a crime I prayed would never happen. For weeks. The cameras showed nothing but the mundane tragedy of our lives. Me, moving through the rooms like a shadow. Him, coming home late, pecking my cheek with cold lips, and retreating to his study. I started to believe I was wrong, that I had manufactured this crisis. And then came our 15th anniversary. I had made reservations at the restaurant where he'd proposed, hoping, pathetically, that we could find our way back to the people we used to be. He called me an hour before we were supposed to leave. "Liv, I am so sorry," he'd said, his voice a perfect symphony of regret. "This massive deal just came through. I can't leave. We'll celebrate this weekend, I promise. A real celebration." I knew he was lying. I could hear it in the hollow space around his words. I said, "Of course, honey. I understand. Work is important." I canceled the reservation, sat in our cavernous kitchen, and opened the app on my phone. An hour later, his car pulled into the driveway. My breath caught. Was I wrong? Was he coming home? But he wasn't alone. The camera in the living room flickered to life, and there she was, Angela, young, blonde, and laughing at something he said as he poured them both a glass of my best scotch. They didn't even bother with pretense. They moved through my house, his hand on the small of her back, as if they owned it, as if I was the intruder. I watched, my body turning to ice, as they went upstairs, into our bedroom, into my bed. The smoke detector camera gave me a perfect, horrifying view. It was a brutal, passionless affair, a transaction of bodies. And as I watched, the grief, the suspicion, and the heartbreak inside me didn't curdle into sadness. It crystallized. It became something hard, sharp, and brutally clear. It became rage. The camera kept rolling, but I wasn't watching them anymore. My mind was racing, my legal brain clicking through possibilities, discarding each one as insufficient. Divorce was too easy. Public shame was a start, but not enough. I needed something biblical, something that would scar him in a way he could never, ever forget. I looked at the nightstand on the screen, at the bottle of expensive organic lubricant he'd bought a few weeks ago, claiming it was for us. The lie was so audacious it was almost beautiful. And that's when the idea sparked. It was insane. It was monstrous. It was perfect. The next morning, after he'd left for work, whistling, I went to the hardware store. I walked down the aisle of adhesives, past the wood glue and the epoxies, until I found it. The industrial-grade, maximum bond superglue, the kind that came with a chemical warning label. I bought 3 tubes. Returning to the house felt like entering a crime scene, only the crime was my own life. The air was thick with the ghost of her perfume and his lies. I went upstairs, my feet silent on the plush runner he'd insisted on buying. Our bedroom was neat, the bed made. He'd always been meticulous about hiding his messes. On the nightstand, next to a framed photo of us smiling in Tuscany, sat the bottle of lubricant. It was a cruel joke, a prop in the theater of our marriage. I picked it up, the smooth glass cool against my skin. For a moment, I saw the life that photo represented, a life of shared dreams and easy laughter, a life before the silence and the suspicion had taken root. I almost faltered. The woman in that photo, the hopeful, trusting Olivia, would have just cried. She would have packed a bag and left. But she was gone, buried under a year of silent grief and calculated betrayal. I was someone else now. With the steady hands of a surgeon, I emptied the lubricant into the sink. The clear, viscous liquid swirled down the drain, taking the last remnants of my sentimentality with it. Then, I took the tubes of superglue. I squeezed the contents into the bottle, the acrid chemical smell filling the bathroom. It had the same consistency, the same deceptive clarity. I screwed the cap back on and placed the bottle exactly where I had found it, right next to our smiling, lying faces. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait. The waiting was the hardest part. It was a unique form of psychological torture. Every ping of my phone made my heart leap. I packed a small bag and checked into a nondescript hotel a few towns over, telling Mark I was visiting my sister for the weekend to give her some support. He'd love the idea. That's great. "Honey, you two have fun. Don't worry about me." His relief was palpable, even over the phone. In the sterile quiet of the hotel room, I set up my laptop, the live feed from the bedroom camera open in a window. I drank black coffee and watched my empty bed for hours that stretched into an eternity. It was a Friday night. I knew he wouldn't wait long. Just after 9 p.m., the bedroom door opened. The light from the hallway spilled in, silhouetting two figures, Mark and Angela. My breath hitched. This was it. The rage I'd been nursing flared hot and bright. They were clumsy and eager, shedding clothes onto the floor, laughing like careless teenagers. He led her to the bed, my bed, and the scene from a few nights before began to play out again. But this time, I wasn't a victim watching in horror. I was a predator, watching my prey step into a snare. I saw him reach for the bottle. My entire body went rigid. He fumbled with the cap, pouring a generous amount into his palm. The seconds stretched, each one a lifetime. And then, it happened. The initial contact was followed by a moment of confusion. Then, a sharp, sudden cry of pain from Angela. Mark tried to pull away, and his own yelp of agony echoed hers. The panic was instantaneous and absolute. Their frantic, clumsy struggles only made it worse. The bonding agent activating with pressure and heat. Their bodies, which had been joined in a moment of cheap pleasure, were now fused in a grotesque tableau of pain and consequence. The screaming started then, raw and terrified. It was a symphony of his arrogance and her ambition turning to pure, animalistic fear. I watched, my face illuminated by the cold blue light of the laptop screen, and I felt nothing but a profound, chilling calm. My heart rate was steady. My hands did not shake. I let them scream for 10 minutes. I wanted the reality of their situation to sear itself into their minds. I wanted them to understand the permanence of it. Then, with deliberate slowness, I picked up my phone. I dialed 911. "I'd like to report a medical emergency," I said to the dispatcher, my voice the epitome of a concerned, distant citizen. I gave them my address. I explained that I was out of town, but my home security system had picked up sounds of extreme distress. I didn't give them my name. My next call was to the anonymous tip line of the biggest local news channel. I told them a prominent local financial advisor was involved in a developing, highly unusual, and newsworthy incident, and they might want to send a truck to his address. I hung up before they could ask any questions. My final act was the most important. I had the entire event recorded, saved to a secure cloud server. I edited the clip, blurring Angela's face just enough to create a sliver of legal deniability for myself, but not enough to hide her identity from anyone who knew her. Then I created a dozen anonymous email accounts. And with a single click, I sent the video to every major news outlet in the state, every gossip blogger I could find, and the entire contact list from Mark's private email, which I had hacked months ago. The trap hadn't just sprung, it had detonated. I closed my laptop, turned off my phone, and for the first time in over a year, I slept without dreaming. The world woke up to my story. I woke up to the silence of my hotel room, a stark contrast to the storm I knew was raging outside. I turned my phone back on, and it immediately began to vibrate, a frantic, buzzing seizure as hundreds of notifications flooded in. News alerts, missed calls, a cascade of texts from friends, family, and colleagues, all with the same breathless tone of shock and disbelief. Mark and Angela were the #1 trending topic on Twitter. The news channels had a field day, their helicopters circling my house like vultures. The headlines were brutal and hilarious in their absurdity. Sticky situation for cheating CEO. Husband glued to mistress in adultery catastrophe. 911 call reveals bizarre lovers' quarrel. They played the 911 call on a loop, followed by pixelated footage of two people, fused together and covered by a white sheet. Being awkwardly maneuvered out of my front door by a team of bewildered-looking paramedics. They were a local laughingstock, a national punchline. The video I leaked had gone viral, a grainy, horrifyingly intimate glimpse into their downfall. Mark's firm immediately placed him on indefinite leave. His photo was plastered everywhere, his carefully constructed image as a pillar of the community shattered into a million pieces. Angela, despite my half-hearted blurring, was identified within hours. She deleted her social media, but it was too late. The internet had already saved everything. She was branded, a digital scarlet letter burned onto her reputation forever. I drove home 2 days later, pulling up to a street still clogged with news vans. I walked through my front door with a detective's detachment, observing the scene. There were remnants of the paramedics' work, snipped bits of gauze, a discarded latex glove. The expensive sheets on my bed had been cut apart. The house felt violated, but it also felt cleansed. The poison had been lanced. The first person to meet me was not a friend or family member, but a process server. He stood on my porch, looking uncomfortable, and handed me a thick envelope. "Olivia Brown?" he asked. I nodded, taking the documents. My name was on the top, listed as the defendant. The plaintiff was Mark Brown. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd sat just nights before, watching his betrayal, and I read the lawsuit. He was suing me for assault, for battery, for intentional infliction of emotional distress, and for grievous bodily harm. He was claiming millions in damages for his physical pain, his public humiliation, and the destruction of his career. I read the words, and a laugh escaped my lips. It started as a low chuckle and grew into a full-blown, tear-streaming, gut-wrenching laugh. The audacity, the sheer, unmitigated gall of the man. He wasn't just a cheater. He was a narcissist of the highest order. He genuinely saw himself as the victim. In his mind, his affair was a private indiscretion, but my response was a criminal act. He thought he could use the law, my law, the institution I had dedicated my life to, as a weapon against me. That was his second mistake. His first was cheating on me. His second was underestimating me. He thought I was just the grieving, broken wife. He'd forgotten that I was the lawyer who had dismantled corporate giants, the prosecutor who had put murderers behind bars. He wanted to fight me in a courtroom. He wanted to turn our private war into a public spectacle governed by rules of evidence and cross-examination. A grim smile spread across my face. He had no idea what was coming. I was no longer just the woman who had superglued her husband to his mistress. I was now his legal adversary, and I was going to bury him. I picked up my phone and called my partners at the firm. "I'm going to be taking a leave of absence," I said. "I have a new client. Myself." The battle had just begun, and he had foolishly chosen to wage it on my home turf. The courtroom would be our new bedroom, and this time, the humiliation would be entirely his. The courtroom felt colder than my house ever had. It was a sterile, impersonal arena of dark wood and fluorescent lighting, a place where messy human tragedies were dissected under the cold, clinical eye of the law. Mark sat at the plaintiff's table, looking diminished. The ordeal had been physically brutal. The surgeons had managed to separate them, but it had required painful skin grafts for both of them. He walked with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of his stupidity. He wore an expensive suit, trying to project the image of a wronged man of stature, but the effect was ruined by the faint sheen of sweat on his brow. He wouldn't look at me. His lawyer, a slick, overconfident man named Peterson, painted a lurid picture for the jury. He described me as a woman scorned, a vengeful Medea driven mad by jealousy. He used my grief over our son's death against me, suggesting I was mentally unstable, emotionally volatile, and prone to extreme actions. This was not a prank. Peterson thundered in his opening statement, gesturing toward me. This was a calculated, malicious act of torture, an act designed to inflict maximum pain and public humiliation. Olivia Brown may be a lawyer, but on that night, she was an attacker. When it was my turn to represent myself, I approached the jury box not with anger, but with a quiet, somber gravity. I didn't need theatrics. I had the truth. What Mr. Peterson describes is the act, I began, my voice steady. But he has conveniently omitted the cause. This case is not about a bottle of superglue. It is about a marriage systematically destroyed by deceit, and about a man who believed the rules of decency and fidelity did not apply to him. The trial was a grueling, 2-week affair, but the turning point, the moment the entire narrative shifted, came when I called Mark to the stand for cross-examination. It was the first time we had faced each other directly. He swaggered to the witness box, trying to project an aura of confidence, but I could see the tremor in his hands. I let him get comfortable. I started with simple questions about our life, our assets, his work. He answered Peterson's questions by painting himself as a long-suffering husband, trapped with a grieving, distant wife. He almost sounded convincing. Then, I changed tactics. Mr. Brown, I said, my tone shifting from conversational to surgical. On the night of our 15th anniversary, you told me you were stuck at the office closing a massive deal. Can you tell the court the name of that client? He faltered. I don't recall the specific name. It was a hectic time. A multi-million-dollar deal? And you don't recall the client's name? I let the question hang in the air. Perhaps because there was no deal? Perhaps because your client was Angela Miller, and the deal was being closed in our marital bed? Peterson shot to his feet. Objection. Relevance? It speaks to a pattern of deceit and perjury. Your Honor, I countered calmly, it speaks to the plaintiff's character, which he himself has made central to this case. The judge overruled the objection. For the next hour, I dismantled him. I had subpoenaed his financial records. I presented credit card statements to the jury on a large monitor, a charge for a $500 dinner on our anniversary, not near his office, but near Angela's apartment, a charge for a diamond bracelet from Tiffany's, a gift I never received, thousands of dollars in hotel bills, florists, secret cash withdrawals from our joint accounts. It wasn't just an affair. It was financial fraud. He was embezzling from our shared future to fund his sordid little life. With every question, a piece of his facade crumbled. The confident CEO was replaced by a stammering, cornered liar. My final question was quiet, but it landed like a bomb in the silent courtroom. Mr. Brown, the physical pain you endured is undeniable, but can you tell the jury, under oath, that it is a greater pain than the one you inflicted on our marriage and on the memory of the son we lost when you brought your mistress into the home we built together? He stared at me, his face a mask of pure hatred. For the first time, the jury saw him not as a victim, but as he truly was, a cruel, selfish man who had broken every vow he had ever made. He had no answer. He just sat there, exposed and defeated, under the harsh courtroom lights. He had sued me for inflicting injury, but in that moment, It was clear to everyone that all I had done was hold up a mirror to the wounds he had already inflicted himself. The jury's deliberation was surprisingly short, less than 4 hours. When they filed back into the jury box, their faces were grim and unreadable. The air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation. Mark sat rigidly at his table, his knuckles white as he gripped its edge. I stood alone at mine, my hands clasped behind my back, my posture straight. I felt a strange sense of calm. Whatever the verdict, I had already won. I had exposed the truth, not just his infidelity, but the rot at the core of his character. I had taken back my narrative. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, stood and handed a paper to the bailiff. She looked at me for a brief second, and I saw a flicker of something: empathy, understanding. The judge read the verdict, his voice flat and formal. On the charge of assault, we, the jury, find the defendant, Olivia Brown, not guilty. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. On the charge of battery, we find the defendant not guilty. On the charge of intentional infliction of emotional distress, not guilty. With each not guilty, it was like a physical weight was being lifted from my shoulders. But the final blow was yet to come. The judge then addressed the countersuit I had filed against Mark for financial malfeasance and breach of fiduciary duty within the marriage. Based on the overwhelming evidence of financial infidelity and the misappropriation of marital assets, the court awards the defendant, Ms. Brown, 100% of the couple's shared property, assets, and investments. The gavel fell with a sharp crack that echoed the sound of Mark's life breaking apart. He slumped in his chair as if he'd been physically struck. He was left with nothing but his debts, his skin grafts, and his public disgrace. His lawyer, Peterson, patted him on the shoulder, a useless gesture of comfort. I gathered my files, my movements slow and deliberate. As I walked out of the courtroom, I passed his table. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a venomous, impotent rage. "You ruined me," he hissed, his voice barely a whisper. I paused and looked down at him, not with hatred, or even pity, but with a profound and weary indifference. "No, Mark," I said, my voice just as quiet. "You just finally have to pay for the damage you caused. You built this prison yourself. All I did was lock the door." The days that followed were a blur of legal paperwork, of transferring titles and closing accounts. I sold the house, the beautiful colonial that had become a monument to our lives. I couldn't stand to be in it another day. I donated Mark's expensive suits to a charity that helps homeless men get back on their feet. I stood in the empty living room one last time, the afternoon sun streaming through the bay windows. On the mantelpiece, a single item remained: our wedding photo, the one from Tuscany. I picked it up and looked at the smiling, happy couple, two strangers from a lifetime ago. I didn't feel anger or sadness anymore. I felt a sense of peace. That chapter was over. I had faced the monster, and I had won. But the victory wasn't in the money or the public verdict. The victory was in this quiet moment, in the realization that I had survived. I had walked through fire and come out the other side, not unscathed, but whole. I left the photo on the mantel for the new owners to find, a relic of a past that no longer belonged to me, and walked out the front door into the clean, crisp air of my new life. In the end, revenge is a hollow victory if it's the only thing you have left. For a long time, the anger was all I had. It was a shield, a fire that kept the cold grief at bay. The world saw my actions as a spectacular, almost theatrical act of vengeance. They celebrated the downfall of a cheating man and the triumph of a wronged woman. But what they didn't see was the quiet aftermath. The silence of an empty apartment. The long nights spent reckoning with the person I had become. Was justice served? I believe so. The legal system is designed to handle disputes, but it often fails to account for the profound, soul-crushing wound of betrayal. In a world of broken rules, I had to create my own. But my real victory wasn't in the courtroom or the headlines. It was in the slow, painstaking process of rebuilding. It was in rediscovering the woman I was before I became Mrs. Brown. It was in finding joy not in someone else's destruction, but in my own quiet creation. A new law practice helping women escape toxic marriages, a small garden on my new balcony, the ability to laugh without a bitter edge. Justice is about balance. For every action, a consequence. Mark faced his. But my true peace came when I realized my story was no longer about him. It was about me. It was about a woman who refused to be a victim, who used her pain as fuel, and who finally learned that the greatest power lies not in breaking someone else down, but in having the strength to build yourself back up. So I ask you, where is the line between justice and revenge? Have you ever been pushed to a point where you felt you had to take matters into your own hands? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories matter.